seeks God as creator and the instructor, but not merely from relief of trouble. Again, why is Elihu saying this to Job unless he feels that it is relevant to Job's case? And so, yes, he is making some true statements here. But the issue here is, why is he making these statements to Job? These are not just platitudes that he's throwing out there for no reason. These are not just arbitrary platitudes that he's throwing out. He's not just simply saying, I'm taking you guys to school on some general themes about God. That's not what he's doing. He's accusing Job.
Yeah, he thinks that Job's prayers, the things that Job says has been in vanity versus in faith.
That's exactly what he's doing. But, and see, this is where, now, and here's the thing. This is where, when I talk about him being sophisticated in his approach, in his approach, and it could very well be that this is just his way of doing it, where he has this natural bent and natural inclination to express himself in a way without being overtly accusatory. But it's a really shrewd way of presenting it. And so, but he's nonetheless doing it. And he's pointing out that when cries are empty, they go to God when they're empty, or when they spring forth from pride, God doesn't answer them. Now remember, Job, his issue, what was Job's issue with God? Anybody? What was his biggest issue with God? Anybody?
He couldn't hear from him.
He wasn't hearing from God. He wasn't hearing from God. And so Elihu is saying here that surely God will not hear vanity. Neither will the Almighty regard it. Was Elihu correct about Job?
No.
Anybody else?
No, he was not.
No. He's saying that the reason Job is not hearing from God is because what Job is speaking is vanity. That's what he's saying. That God won't hear him. Not only is God not hearing because of the vanity of his prayers, but neither will the Almighty regard it. This is the same Job that we read about in Hebrews chapter 11. And guess who's not in that chapter? Elihu. This teaches us that suffering alone does not make prayer acceptable. But there needs to be humility and sincerity when we come before God. Now, let me say this. Let me make something very clear. What Elihu is saying is 100% correct, just not when it comes to Job. Job was a man of faith. Job never lost his integrity. And here's the thing. Job never charged God foolishly. Job never cursed God to his face, as was the mission of Satan, to get him to do that. He never did. He never did. in verse 14 through 16, Elihu, he goes on and he says, although you say that you shall not see him, yet judgment is before him. Therefore, you trust in him. But now, because it is not so, he has visited in his anger. God has visited in his anger. Did he though?
Nope.
No. It had nothing to do with anger. Nothing to do with anger. This is the guy who said he's speaking for God in an answer to God, to to Job's wish. And so he goes on, yet he knoweth it not in great extremity. Therefore does Job, listen, therefore, this is what Elihu says, therefore does Job open his mouth in vain, and he multiplies his words without knowledge. Now, some will look at this and go, oh, these are words that are similar to what God himself used. And maybe make some case out of it. But the issue will always be the same as we've been discussing. Now, so the conclusion here is this, that it calls for trust in God. Trusting in God. And see, when we look at these things, when we read these chapters, we need to look at these things and see what it is that the Lord wants to show us and teach us from these things. And so we need to trust God even when he is not seen or is understood. Job wasn't seeing God, and he also was not understanding God. But see, God breaks in a few chapters, and he gives Job the understanding, and he reveals himself to Job. See, God looks after his people. He looks after his people. And when they become frightened by his absence, when their world becomes darkened because the light of God seems to be gone, it causes us to react in certain ways. And remember, Job was human, just like us, subject to all the weaknesses that are attributed to man. And we can't lose sight of this. God's judgment is certain. He will step in, even though it be delayed. He never denies justice. He always comes just in the nick of time. Always. The suggestion that Elihu is making here is that the present affliction that Job is going through is a form of correction and not punishment that could be given. But again, the question that I want to ask all of you to consider when you look at these verses going forward, tomorrow, tonight, the next day, next week, whatever. What did Job, at this point, before God came in, what did Job need to be corrected for? Was it for something before the affliction, or was it for something that happened after the affliction? This is the big question that needs to be answered. This is the question that you have to reconcile in your own mind. And I will leave it up to you to not try to make that decision for you. But that is where the principal discussions that we're talking about, that's where these things are taking place. In that area where the error that is being attributed to Job is speaking too much about matters beyond his understanding. This I agree with, because it is clear that that is true, because this is what God tells Job later on. Who is this that darkens counsel with words without knowledge? And we all know that when the time comes, Job is going to acquiesce to that point and submit to God in all humility. After all, he is a man of true and genuine faith, a man who is righteous in the sight of God. So the lesson is that when God's ways are hidden, when God's ways have been removed from the sight of man, the proper response is to be patient and to trust rather than to complain. And this is what we often do. This is what we often do. Sister May, go ahead.
Do you think that, I mean, what I'm seeing, because in chapter 32, I do believe that Bildad, Zophar, and
Eliphaz?
Eliphaz were speaking about Job's situation before.
Right.
But in verse 32, I mean, in chapter 32, I feel like Elihu is talking about Job's situation now. I definitely know that, and the reason is because he said that from his view, he stated that because he justified himself rather than God. So his three friends, definitely before, they were off the chain. But I do feel like he's showing him his justification. I mean, this during.
So then, if it's during, that doesn't make
after the affliction.
If it after, it doesn't make any sense. Because if it's after, and I'll tell you why it doesn't make any sense. Because in 32, they say that Job was righteous in his own eyes. And then he says in verse 2 that he justifies himself rather than God. But they're speaking about the same thing. Because so the correction that Elihu is talking about has already taken place by the affliction that Job is in. So I have to disagree with you on this. This has to do with what Job did before. Because what would he be corrected for? You can't say that Job's response is now. You can't say that his affliction is a prevenient affliction because of what he's going to do. That's what you're saying.
No, I'm saying that Job's three friends were talking about when he was going through this affliction. Job, you must have done something. This is the reason why you're going through this.
Right.
But I feel like Elihu's coming in with the truth that's being revealed here, saying, there are times, Job, where although you were in pain, although you were suffering, you wrongly spoke beyond your understanding about God. And I'm going to correct you in that. That's how I'm seeing that, because because Job's reasoning for, and I understand it, is because, like I said, Job is speaking from a place of pain. He's speaking from a place of lament. He's speaking from a place of suffering.
I get it. I get all that. Okay, so let's go back to your original argument. So you're saying that Elihu is not dealing at all with the reason why Job is being afflicted. That he's only talking about what Job deserves to hear after having been afflicted.
Yeah,
that's what you're saying.
Yes, because there were times where he had justified himself rather than justifying God, and I feel that's what Elihu he's correcting him on.
All right, so let me ask you a question. then why did Elihu break in by saying that his friends answered incorrectly about Job and that he is going to correct the matter? What was Elihu going to correct if what Job was saying only happened after his friends spoke to him?
Because he said, because in 33, he says, "Wherefore, Job, I pray thee, hear my speeches and hearken to all my words. Behold, now I have opened my mouth, my tongue has spoken in my mouth. My word shall be of uprightness of my heart, and my lips shall utter knowledge clearly." And he said, there was a verse where he says, "Job, if you need to speak, please speak, because my desire is to justify you."
I hear you. Justifying from what?
From him being wrongly accused by his three friends.
So Elihu, I'll see you, Mariah. I'm gonna get you in a second. So Elihu his wrath is kindled because he says Job justifies himself rather than God. All right. And then he says in verse 3, also his three friends also against Job's three friends was his wrath kindled because they had found no answer and yet had condemned Job. So answer to what? Because if what you're saying, his friends were dealing with the reason why Job was being afflicted.
Yeah, yes, because his three friends were accusing of him prior to this, saying, "Job, you're wicked." They were all using retributive theology against him, saying, "Job, you must have done this, therefore this happened." But Elihu's saying their case was wrong because they had condemned Job. This is what
No, that's not what he's saying. He's saying that they are wrong about Job being condemned. He's saying
yes, they were condemning him.
They were condemning it. You're right. But Elihu is saying that you're wrong, that they were wrong about condemning him, but that what Job was getting was correction. So the issue is still
Job
the same.
Was getting correction.
Yeah. Elihu is saying that no, he's telling his friends, you're wrong. Job is not being condemned for his sin that he committed. Job is being corrected for a sin that he committed. He's being chastised.
Yes, because his three friends were the accusers. They were accusing him and condemning him from something that he did in his past. Throughout this experience, because Elihu is the last to speak, he's heard it all.
And so you're saying that Elihu is not accusing Job of anything.
I think he's trying to correct him.
For what?
For justifying himself rather than God.
So his friends were right.
No, because the reason why his friends weren't right, Jonathan, is because those three friends condemned him from something prior. Elihu has observed this whole thing and seeing, Job, you've been in pain, you are hurting, but there were times in this.
I know you really want this to be the truth, but you're so far off it's not even believable. Let me tell you something. Let me tell you the reason why. Those guys were condemning Job, saying that Job is being condemned. That these afflictions that God sent him was a result of his sin. Now, if that is true, the reality here is this: Elihu is saying that the affliction that Job is undergoing is corrective in nature, to which you already agreed several times. Now you're saying that's not true, that Elihu is only saying that he needs to correct Job because of his responses to his friends, not for any sin, which makes absolutely no sense. It makes no sense at all. Elihu, his disagreement with Job's friends is not about whether or not he sinned or not. That wasn't the disagreement. the disagreement had to do with the reason for the affliction. Was it or was it for corrective purposes, or was it for to condemn Job?
So when when Elihu was saying this in verse 2, was he said against Job was his wrath kindled because he justified himself rather than God. So is he saying that before the affliction he justified himself rather than God?
Elihu said plainly that Job's friends did not answer Job in a convincing way. And so, but what you're saying is that Elihu's responses are only Elihu is only responding to Job based on his responses to the friends, not to any sin that he was committed. That's what you're saying right now.
No.
But
Okay.
Elihu is the one who told his friends, no, you got it wrong. Job is not being condemned. And he's the one who said, I want to justify you. What would he be justifying him for?
Because the other three were condemning him and saying he was wicked and saying all these things about him.
I get it. Mariah, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that Elihu, we were not told that he was there in the beginning, but apparently he was there at some point to listen to all of this transpire. And Elihu's issue was they had gotten no answer from Job. And it was because of that they were condemning Job, right? Rather than saying that it was correctiveness. Now, Elihu goes on to say that when I had waited, this is 32:16, when I had waited for they spake not, but stood still and answered no more, I said, I will answer also my part. I also will show my opinion. So now he's given his opinion in the matter of why Job is receiving the affliction in which he is, and the reason for God not answering him. That is what Elihu's total response is that he's putting forth his opinion, saying that it's come from God because this is why. You guys think it's because he had sin and you're condemning him for his sin, but I'm going to show you that by the wisdom that I have, that it's actually God correcting him for his sin. And that is his opinion for why Job is receiving the affliction that he's receiving. It's not that he's now just responding from how Job is gone through his affliction. That's actually what God does. God actually corrects Job on how he had dealt with his affliction and showing him his sovereignty. But it's absolutely from the beginning, he is putting forth his opinion on why Job is receiving affliction.
So I agree with that. So, Meg, here's the issue. So, from your perspective, did Job, from Elihu's perspective, in your mind, in Elihu's perspective, did Job commit any sin at all?
From Elihu's
Is it your perspective that Elihu's perspective is that Job did not sin at all?
Is it my perspective from Elihu's perspective?
Does Elihu believe that Job sinned at all?
I think that Elihu believed that Job did sin, but it wasn't in the way that his friends thought that he did.
Sin is sin. Before the affliction, did Job sin? To Elihu. In Elihu's perspective, did Job sin before receiving the affliction? or did he only see sin as a result or after the effect? After the fact, which one is it? Either Elihu believed that Job did sin before he was afflicted, or he believed that the only sin Job committed was after.
But have we seen Job? Have we seen Elihu bring up Job's past?
I'm just asking you a question. Did Elihu believe that, like the friends, that Job sinned? Yes or no?
I think that he's not bringing up his past because I haven't read anything where he was. Did his other friends? Absolutely.
Well, let me ask you a
But did
question.
Elihu?
Let me
No.
ask you a question then. Did God bring up any sin on the part of Job? Because I know you read forward. Did God accuse Job of any sin?
Not in a way of Job being wicked. It was in a way, like somebody said that was really good. Oh, it was Lisa. In the way that God is correcting Job, to me, I feel it was very gracious. I feel like he was giving Job a revelation.
God was dealing with Job like a father deals with a child.
Absolutely.
Who is learning and growing.
Absolutely. 100%.
So what I'm asking you then is what was Elihu correcting God for, or correcting Job for? What was Elihu trying to correct Job about?
For the times during his experience that he justified himself rather than God.
So Elihu, in your estimation, did not perceive or believe of any sin on the part of Job before he started talking to his three friends.
I don't see it in what I'm reading. No.
All right.
Can I read 34 verse 37? It says,
Sure.
for he added rebellion unto his sin. He clappeth his hands amongst us and multiplied his words against God. He's saying he added. So to add something, there has to be something there prior to add to. So he's saying that there was sin before, and now he's just multiplying his sin.
What do you think, Meg?